Hello everyone. So in the last video, we have completed the promise.raise static function. In this video, we will be looking at the promise.all static function. So let's check the documentation. Promise.all static method takes an iterable of promises as input and returns a single promise. This returned promise fulfills when all of the inputs promises fulfill with an array of fulfillment values. It rejects when any of the inputs promises rejects with this first rejected reason. So what it means is that it takes a list of promises and it waits till all of the promises fulfills. If any of them rejects, then promise.all will return a rejected promise. Okay, so that's it. So let's check this example here. So we have three promise instances, and the first one is a resolved promise with the value 3. The second one is a normal variable. I mean, it's not a promise, it's a primitive value. And the third promise, here the resolve function will be executed after 100 millisecond, and the value should be this. You can see that we are using the all static function here, and we are passing an array of these three instances, these three values. So it says that it takes an iterable of promises. Array is an iterable, and this promise.all function returns a new promise. So we are able to call the then method to it. And here you can see that all these three promises will fulfill. So here we are passing the on fulfill callback to the then function. So this callback will be executed when the original promise fulfills. So when this here in this case, the original promise fulfills when all these three promises are in the fulfilled state. So you can see that the output. So from the log, we will get 342 and this string. One other thing is that here you can see that in this iterable, the order is maintained in the output as well. So promise one's fulfilled value is 3 and promise 2 is, I mean, it's a primitive value. So the fulfilled value is 42. That's the second one. And the third one takes 100 milliseconds to complete and its value is here. So the order is maintained in the output. And what happens if any of it is a rejected promise? Then that will be the rejected reason of the promise.all function. Okay, so it waits till all of the promises completes, and if any of them rejects, and the first rejected promise reason will be the rejected reason of this promise.all function. Okay, now let's test some examples. So let's do this one. We can copy this example from here, and we can try in this console. Okay, so you can see that 342 FO. And let's change this example a little bit. And here, let this be promise 1 and this be promise 3. So here so this will be fulfilled last because internally it uses timer and it takes 100 milliseconds to complete. Now if you see the result this time, you can see that um, even though this is the last one to complete, its order is still maintained. Okay, let's do one more thing. Let's change this to 2 seconds instead of 100 millisecond. You can see that even though the other two are completed quickly, it waits for this one to complete. So this all static function will be fulfilled only when all of the input promises are fulfilled or any of them rejects. Okay. And like I said in the last video, promise.all takes an iterable, right? So it can be any iterable. So here we can simply pass a string and so this time, yeah, this is the iterable and we will get the output. So each of the character. So when we iterate this string using for of loop, so we will get T, E, S, T. Okay. So yeah, now let's implement promise.all. So here in our MyPromise class, we have completed raise method in the last video. Now let's do promise.all. So it takes a list of promises and it returns a new promise. So here we have to put our logic. So what all things we need? We need an array for the fulfilled value. So for that, and now we need to iterate through this list of promises. And before that, since we have to keep the, I mean, we need to keep the order. We need we need to access the index, and it has to be an array. But the all method gets an iterable, right? So all iterables don't have the length property and the index. So we need to convert this into an array. So for that, we can use the array.from method. So in this time, when we pass this iterable to this from static method of the array class, it will convert these promises into an array. But one thing to note here is that the from method uh, works not only for um, iterables, but it will work for array like objects as well. Which I mean, like if, for example, array.from, let's say we are passing an empty object. In that case, also it returns an empty array. But in the here, empty object is not an iterable. Okay, so we need to add a check before it. What we can do here is if type of, so what I'm doing here is that if from the input we are checking if the input object have a property symbol.iterator and checking its type to be a function. So this is the condition for an iterable. So if an object is set to be an iterable, it must have a property symbol.iterator and its value should be a function. So if the input is not like that, let's say if you are passing an empty object which is not an iterable, it shouldn't process. It should throw this type error, right? And why we are adding a return statement here is that we shouldn't execute further. Okay, even if we execute, since we are calling the reject method, we know that like once reject is called, the other errors thrown or calling the resolve or reject method won't work, but still the execution continues. So for stopping the execution, we are using the return statement here. Okay. Now let's do the rest of the code. Now this condition is satisfied here. Now this is an iterable and we converted it into a array. Now we can loop through the array. So here you can see that I'm using a traditional for loop, and we can simply use for each since this is an array, but and it is more readable. But since why I'm using this is that, so since this is a library code and we don't know the length of the promises that we will get, right? So in that case, this traditional for loop performs better than for each when the input is very high, the input length is very high. So that's the only reason I'm using for loop here instead of for each. Yeah. So here what we are doing is that, so this list, okay, list of items, it can have promise instances as well as primitive values, which means items that are not promises. So we need to convert everything into promise. That's why we are using the resolve static function here. Okay, so everything is now a promise instance. Now we can call the then method. Now in the then method, we are simply passing this reject function as the on rejected value. So this time what happens is that if any of the item rejects, then the reject function should be called with the rejected reason of that promise. Okay, so that's why we are passing the reject as the on rejected value in this then method. It's simple. Now the logic comes in this on fulfilled value. I mean, when we have to resolve this. Okay, so here, what we can do, so we get the resolved value here, fulfilled value here. So we need to push the fulfilled value into this result, but we shouldn't do like this. Okay, if you simply do that like this, the order is now gone because we don't know which one fulfills first. It won't fulfill in the order that we pass. So if you just do result dot push, the order is not maintained. Okay, so instead of what we will do, result of I to value. Okay, now when all of them are resolved, we have to use the resolve function and the value should be this result. Okay, now if you do something like this, this is not guaranteed. If you do something like this, so you may feel that this works, but this is not guaranteed. So the issue here, I mean, first we explain what we are doing here. So um, so we iterate through the items, I mean the list, and we are calling the then method on each item. Okay, so this callback will be executed if the original promise fulfills and only after it fulfills, right? Now we are getting the value and saving it. So each time we save the value, the result array increases with the values. Okay, so here our logic should be like we are checking the length, and if the length is equal to the original input's length, then that means that all of them are fulfilled, right? But the issue here is that we don't know like which one resolves first. I will, so let's say, so here this is an array, okay, and I'm setting, so I'm setting a value 20 here on the index 4. Okay, this was an empty array and we are directly setting 20 on the index 4. Okay, now let's do, you can see that we get the value 5 even though there is only one item inside the array. Since we're directly mutating, I mean adding the value to index 4, the length property will give you this value. So that's why this is not guaranteed, this check is not guaranteed. Okay, so instead what we can do is that we can create a variable outside and its initial value will be 0. And what we can do, each time we get a value, I mean this full on fulfilled is called, we can increment this completed. Okay, now instead of checking result or length, we can just use the completed variable here and check and compare the length with it. Now this is guaranteed. Okay, and yeah, one more thing here is what happens if the input array is, or the input iterable is empty. So in Promise.all case, it should fulfill with that input array. So what I mean by that is Promise.all, and we are just passing an empty array here. Now then, so it returns the empty array. It's not in any pending state or anything. It's just fulfilled state with the empty array as the result. So for handling that, we can just, so we created the list here, and you can just add a check here. If list.length is 0, then what we have to do? We have to call the resolve method. Resolve that. So result is an empty array. We can just resolve, and we don't have to execute the rest of the code, so we can simply add a return statement here. Okay. Yeah. Now in this, if any of the error happened when executing this, we can simply catch that error and we can call the reject method with the error. Okay. Now let's test our implementation. So here we just pass a normal iterable string and we get the expected result. Now let's pass something that is not an iterable. So here we are passing on fulfilled as console.log and on rejected as also console.log. So we get that object is not iterable because it's thrown from here. So we passed an empty object. So the empty object don't have a symbol dot iterator field. So it rejects with this type error. Okay. Now, yeah. So this time we are passing three items into this array. So the first item is a promise, which the resolve function will be executed after 2 seconds, and the value will be first. And second and third item is just a string. Okay. Let's see what happens. So after 2 seconds, we get this array as the fulfilled value. Okay. Now let's do again. So here, instead of the third, we can just pass promise dot reject of string rejected. Now we can pass on rejected as well. Now let's see what happens. Yeah, it immediately rejected because out of these three items, the third one is a rejected promise. So it rejects first and we get that result. Now let's change a little bit here. Uh, let's change this to a delayed reject. It's a new promise. Mm, so just use our, so here I'm using the old promise. So I mean the original promise. Now we can use our promise object here. So my promise. Now here we are using the reject method. Now again, set timeout, calling the reject method, this time after 3 seconds. Now rejected. So here in this case, you can see that the first item is a promise. Here the resolve function will be executed after 2 seconds and the value should be first. The second item is simply a primitive as a string. And the third item is again a promise instance. So here the reject function will be executed after 3 seconds. Okay, so let's see what the result here. So you can see that after 3 seconds, this is executed and the all function simply rejected. And the second console.log is executed with the rejected reason, which is this rejected string. Okay, so here what happens is that this one is completes first, second. So and then after 2 seconds, this one is fulfilled, and after 3 seconds, this is rejected. So that's why after 3 seconds, this promise.all, I mean rejected with this reason. In the same example, let's just change this second. We can simply directly reject. So this time, all these values are promise instances. The first one is, I mean, it will be eventually fulfilled. And the second one is an immediately rejected promise. And the third one is also a delayed rejecting promise. But in this case, since the second one reject immediately, that will be the final output. So let's do. Yeah, so just change this to my promise. Okay. So you can see that first rejected is printed. Okay. Yeah. So this is the implementation of Promise.all. Thank you for watching.